what marketing is, and today what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down what the basic marketing plan will have, which is going to be mostly talking about the 4 P's of marketing, right? So we're going to basically break this whole presentation down into 2 presentations. So there's going to be a part 1 and part 2. Okay. So let's start talking about product, which is obviously one of the 4 P's, right? So what is a product? We've already discussed products generically. It includes both what will be a good or a service, or a combination in goods and services. Now, how do you come up with new products and new services? So this is a typical, what it would be called the stage gate process on the new product development space. And what you do is you break down the product creation into different stages, right? Starting from ideation all the way to commercialization here at the bottom, right? And what you're going to do, because most new products fail, is you're going to kind of break down the process into the different stages and make sure that only viable options move from one stage to the next. So in between the stages, there are going to be these gates here, right? In these arrows, where you're going to do an evaluation of the different options that you have and see whether it should proceed forward to the next stage. Okay? And you're going to start with ideation. We've already done a little bit of this for your business plan, right? So there are different techniques that you can use to elicit new ideas. In my experience, ideation is not a big problem. There are many ways in which you can come up with ideas, and you're open-minded. Most firms have plenty of ideas. The difficult part is getting from the idea all the way to the commercialization stage, which is taking them to the market, right? Then after that, you're going to do idea screening, right? Which is going to be a pretty cursory and quick determination of whether the ideas have merit or not. Oftentimes, this is going to be based on, what is this going to add to the customer at the end of the day, right? How are you going to be better than what's already available in the marketplace? Okay. And although maybe other considerations like technical feasibility might actually play a part here if the new idea is so radical that it's going to require maybe capabilities that are beyond the scope of what the firm can actually take on. Okay. Then after that, what you're going to do is you're going to do a business analysis, right? So you're going to look at how is this idea going to pan out from the financial perspective if we are capable of bringing it to market, right? So are we going to be making money? And if we're going to make money, how long is it going to take us to do so? So you're going to do things like a simple break-even analysis where you start seeing how risky it's actually to go forward with this idea. Okay, and like I said before, you're going to evaluate multiple ideas, build business plans for each of them, and then decide whether they are going to actually pay out or not, and how risky it is in the sense of how long it's going to take you to get a profit. Okay, most new products originally usually lose money. The reason why they lose money is because it costs a lot of money to get the product to market, and you're going to have to overcome all that loss over time by selling more units. So usually, initially, you will be not making much money on the products, but that will change over time, and the business plan will reflect this. Okay. Then, if the idea is deemed that it's reasonable or it looks promising, maybe I should say better, and there is a financial case behind it, then what you will do is you start working on the product development, right? And this might involve things like R&D and basically the design of the product and any components that are necessary for the product to be feasible and working in the market. So if you are launching an electric car, how is that electric car going to be charged? Are you going to have a charger associated with the electric car that consumers can actually install in their home? And is that a product that comes with the electric car, or is it a separate product, right? And so the product development phase can actually be lengthy. Companies like Boeing, for example, from the moment that they come up with the idea of a new plane until the plane actually gets sent to customers, usually have a product development cycle between 3 and 5 years. So, well, that might be extreme for other cases. So, for example, in the technology space, the product development cycle might be a lot shorter than that, and it varies widely. And many products don't make it past this stage, and the reason why is because you encounter problems as you're developing the product that basically prevent you from bringing it to the market. So you do another evaluation here, and then after that, one thing that you may or may not do is a test market. Now, a test market is when you basically try not only the product but also the marketing associated with the product, things like advertising, etc., into a smaller scale. So let me show you how this will look like, at least geographically, in the next slide. So you can see here in the United States, there are certain cities or regions that have been typically used for test markets. And the reason why these cities and regions are used is because they are supposedly representative of what will happen in the whole country. The idea behind a test market is because launching a new product is a risky endeavor. Maybe what you might consider doing is, for a limited period of time, maybe 6 months to a year, you might want to introduce that product or service in a few locations in the United States, obviously. And if it does go well, if the results that you find in that limited amount of time are reasonable, then what you can do is you can roll it out nationally, right? So it's a way of testing the waters without investing all the money that is required for a national rollout. Okay. This could be a good idea. It gives you at least some insurance that you're not going to be investing heavily in products or services that are not going to do well. But there are downsides of a test market. The obvious downside is the competition knows that you're test marketing products because they're paying attention to what you're doing, and they can easily sabotage your efforts. For example, by systematically dropping prices only in the localities where you are actually doing the test market. So what this will do is obviously will make their offerings more attractive, but only in those locations. And because of that, your results will tend to be poor, even though the product might actually have merit. And it might lead you to decide not to roll it out nationally, which is exactly what your competitors were hoping you were going to do, because they saw the potential in the product. Okay, so there are ups and downs to test markets, but they are oftentimes used in many products, especially things like consumer packaged goods. Okay, good. Here you have one of the many examples of a product that was actually a bad idea. Now, let me start by saying, I think I already mentioned this, most new products tend to fail, but this is a particularly bad example, right, of brand extension where you're trying to take your brand into a place where it probably has no business being, right? Brand extension is one of the many marketing tools or techniques that can be used to introduce new products. And the idea behind a brand extension is using an existing brand into a new product category. Right? And you can see that, sometimes it makes sense, right? For example, if you are Colgate and you make toothpaste and toothbrushes, maybe you can extend to other care areas, right? But maybe taking it from there all the way to lasagna might actually be a bad idea. By the way, this is a real product. This is not a photoshopped image, right? And this will be actually a fun place to visit if you are ever in LA. You might consider taking a look at some of the failed products. But there are many stories about products that, in hindsight, make no sense, but at the moment they were actually tried. And there are some that probably were kind of crazy and they worked anyway. So, deciding which products are going to be doing well in the marketplace, and I would say it's at least 50% art, 50% science. There are definitely tools and techniques like test markets that you can use to make sure that your risk is minimized, but it's hard to know exactly what's going to happen sometimes. Now, when we're talking about products in general, I'm going to use a simple classification here so that we can try to understand how they behave differently, because they do. You have, depending on how the product's purchased, especially if you look at the amount of time that people spend searching for information and the amount of time that people actually use for making the decision, there are at least 3 different types of products. You have convenience products. These are usually products that there is low level of research that is done by the consumer. Oftentimes, the information that you gather is just at the point of purchase, right? And these are the kind of products that you will usually find in, for example, gas stations, or when you go to a grocery store right by the checkout aisle. The reason why those products are there is because the marketers are hoping that you're going to see the product and quickly just grab one because it's, you know, something that you're used to, you like, it's not risky, at least not for the most part, and because of that, you're just going to make a decision based on something that it's going to be convenient for you, basically, right? Low cost of search, low cost of purchase. Okay. And then you have shopping products. Now, shopping products are different because you're going to spend quite a bit more time doing information search, right? So these kind of products, they might involve you maybe talking to friends, right? If you're looking for a new restaurant for a special occasion, you might actually do some research for that, and maybe going through websites that have information about that product category, or maybe going to some forums, right? So shopping products are products that, because they have a higher inherent risk in them, you're going to be doing so much information search, and the decision process tends to be more involved. Right, here you have typical examples, right? Electronics. They are not the only shopping products, right? But most electronics tend to be shopping products, unless you're talking about maybe USB cables, right? Something that you can also find at the grocery store right next to the candy aisle, right? And then you have specialty products. These are products that are more niche products that may actually have a special significance to some segments, some groups of customers. And these are things like designer clothes, for example, right? Or maybe items that people think are particularly important, and because of that, they might actually spend quite a bit of time researching, and they get more involved into the purchase cycle. Now, it's important to understand how these decisions are made by consumers and how different products are different in this regard, because the way we're going to go about marketing is going to be very different, right? Convenience products, something that, you know, being available and easy to purchase is absolutely essential, because, you know, that's the name of the game. You're reducing the cost of people to make that decision, and they are going to trigger the purchase a lot easier. On the other hand, specialty products, that is really not a big concern. In fact, people will go to great lengths to buy certain items that are not even available in the market at all times. So they will just buy them used, or get in a wait list just because they are really interested in a particular brand or in a particular model, right? So the way you go about marketing is very different. You need to understand how people go about making those purchases, and this is a good classification to do that. Now, when you have a number of products within an organization or a firm, these are a couple of concepts that help us understand how to organize and manage the whole set of products, or your product portfolio, right? So you have a line of products, which is a set of products that are related to each other, either in the functionality or the way people go about buying them, okay? And then you have the product mix, which is the collection of all the products and services that your company is selling. Let me show you this with an example. Here you have, for Colgate Palmolive, here you have the product mix. This is the collection of all the products. Okay, and you can see that these are organized by type of product, right? So here you have product lines. You have oral care, you have personal care, you have home care, and you have pet nutrition, right? And these are very distinct product categories, right? And here within each of these, which we're going to call product lines, right? So here you have one product line, which will be oral care. There's going to be a whole host of products. So you have toothpaste, so you have different brands of toothpaste that have maybe different benefits for the customer, like you have here, like whitening toothpaste versus, you know, for sensitive teeth, right? But they are all toothpaste, okay? And here you have some products for kids, also for oral care, right? Or toothbrushes, right? These are obviously all related. By the way, they have more products. This is just a collection of the products. They also make, for example, dental floss, right? But you see the point. All these products are put together in the same product line, and they might be managed simultaneously by the same product manager because they are related to each other. So if you change the price in one, the collection of prices in the others might also have to be adjusted just to make sure that they are congruent with what you're doing with the whole product line. Okay, and the product mix is the collection of all the products. Yeah, in case you see this, I don't think it's in the book, but one thing that you might talk about this is the number of products that are in a product line. So if you count the number of products or SKUs, stock keeping units, it's going to tell you the depth of the product line, and the breadth of your product mix is the number of product lines that you have. So if you only have one line of products, your product mix will be narrow, and if you have many lines of products, your product mix will be broad. Okay, this is something that you might actually encounter if you read anything about business. Now you know what it means. Good. Now, one concept that is very important when we're actually trying to understand product strategy is this idea of the life cycle of a product. This is something that we have learned by studying sales of products as a product category, right? So if you study the sales of cars, for example, one thing that you will notice is that car sales, they tend to follow a pattern. And I'm not talking about individual models. I'm not talking about, I don't know, a Ford Taurus, right? I can't pronounce that word, right? A Tesla Model 3, right? I'm talking about the sales combined of all the cars into a country, right? And you will see that these sales follow a certain S-shaped curve, right? And what we've done over time is we've, studied all these industries, and we have basically broken down the sales cycle into 4 stages, right? And I'm going to show you in a diagram next, but these are the 4 stages. You have the introductory stage, right, when the products launch into the market and starts maybe taking a foothold of the market. Then it's the growth, when sales start rapidly increasing. Then you reach maturity, when sales stop increasing, or if they increase, they do so at a diminishing rate. And then finally you have the decline when sales starts going down. And this is something that happens with all product categories, okay, and also individual products. But seeing it in individual products is a little bit harder because the sales of individual products might depend on many things. Okay, so let me show you how this looks like graphically. So you have here essentially the diagram. At the bottom you have time, right? So time is increasing. For time 0, which is when the product's introduced into marketplace, here on the left side, right? This little corner here is when the products launch. And by product, I'm not talking about individual models again. I'm talking about, when the first car hit the market in the United States, right? So this will be like 1890, right? So it's been a few years since this, right? And then what you see here, the line in blue, is your sales. And by sales, by the way, you might find this diagram either in number of units sold, which is the typical thing that you will find, or revenue. Revenue will be number of units sold times price. The problem with that is, as price changes, that diagram is going to change. So usually what we display here is the number of units sold, right? So this line that you can see increasing here is the number of products that were sold over time, right? And this pattern, this kind of like I don't know if it's shaped, like a mountain pattern, right? Gets repeated over and over and over again in any product category that you look at, right? You can see in the introductory stage where, sales start growing, but they do so relatively slower, right? In the growth stage is when they really shoot up, right? Maturity is where they grow maybe a little bit, but, overall they stay pretty flat. And then in decline is where, obviously, like the word indicates, your sales start coming down. Oftentimes because there is a new product that has been introduced into the marketplace that does a better job, and because of that, it's taking over the market. That happens all the time, right? And what's interesting, if you're following so far, is that profit, which you have over here in this red line, so I guess I should change the color, right? Follows a similar pattern, but in the beginning, you lose money. You do this with pretty much every product. The reason why is because you have invested heavily in the development of the product, and because of that, you need to recoup those R&D expenses, right? So in the beginning, making the products more expensive, you don't have the experience yet, so it costs you more, less people buying it, you tend to lose money, right? Over time, somewhere at the growth stage, if you're doing a good job, you might start making money. So profits are over here, you can see coming over zero, which means that here you start maybe making some money. You tend to make the most money in the maturity stage, right? So the highest levels of profit are usually when the market is mature. You've already taken care of all the R&D and anything that needs to be done. You have gained the experience necessary to produce the product at a cheaper cost, right? And over time, you're going to start making less and less money, but the larger profits usually happen in the maturity, and then decline obviously comes down. You can start losing money over here too. This diagram is not it's not indicative of every industry. This oftentimes in decline stages you might start losing money. Okay. Good. Now here you have some products that you might be familiar with that are at different stages in the product life cycle right now, right? So really high definition TVs are in the initial stages right now, right? Not every household has a 4K TV, for example. Okay, there are a few, right? It's becoming more common, but not so much. Finding content in 4K is harder, so because of that, maybe there is less incentive for people to do that. Right? In the growth stage, you have things like 3D printers, which are becoming pretty commonplace. Companies like Airbnb, so services they apply to, or maybe paleo or keto products, right? Which seem to be almost going mainstream right now, right? And in mature stage, you have things like laptops, right? Theme parks, although these days they are all closed, so they might actually start their decline earlier than they should. And soft drinks, right? People are not going wild and crazy buying soft drinks. There are other drinks that are becoming exceedingly popular. Things like fizzy water, for example, is now in the I would argue the growth stage, right? And in decline, you have desktops, right? It sounds like archaic technology at this point, although they're very useful if you have more demanding applications like video editing, right? And landline phones, these are hard to find nowadays, and maybe print newspapers, right? So you can see how this applies across multiple product categories that you buy or know about all the time. Okay, good. Now, what do you do with your products? Something associated with the product that is a very important aspect of marketing is branding, right? Branding is essentially anything that makes your product unique and identifiable by customers, and that usually means the name of the brand, right? So the brand name, but also it might mean some symbol, color combination, etc., or mark that enables you to uniquely identify that product, right? So, for example, the golden arches of McDonald's, right? You don't need to say the word McDonald's, just the red and yellow golden arches are uniquely identifiable for you as McDonald's. So anything that you do to make sure that customers or potential customers and consumers know your company and the product that you're selling, it will be considered part of the brand. That will also include things like trade dress, right? Which is the way, for example, the packaging looks, right? So if you are Tiffany and you use a blue bow or something with a particular box, that's part of your branding effort. It's not just the product, it could also be the packaging, right? And trademark is the part of your brand that can actually be legally defended, right? So, because brands are probably one of your most valuable assets as a marketer, there are laws that protect other companies from impersonating your products, right? Counterfeiting your products. So, trademarks are any part of the brand that can actually be enforced. And you can take companies for copying your products or your trade dress to court, and the judge can force them to stop selling or commercializing those products that are actually not in keeping with the legal standards of you keeping your own brand identity. So, continuing with the products, We have different types of products when it comes down to branding. You have national brands or manufacturer brands. Here you have a few examples of consumer packaged goods that have brands that you probably know, like Jiffy or French's Mustard, or what else do we have here? Nutella, my kid's favorite, right? These are all brands that are owned by the manufacturer, right? The company that makes those products, okay? And consumers will actually know those brands well. Then you have private distributor brands. These are brands usually owned by the channel. The channel meaning the company that sells the products. For example, here you have a great value product. It matched demand last year, which is toilet paper, right? But Great Value, it's a brand that it's not a manufacturer. Walmart doesn't make toilet paper, right? They buy the toilet paper from a company and then they slap their name into it, right? And they have come up with several brands like Sam's Choice and Great Value that are associated with the distributor, in this case Walmart. And most distributors have that. Target has their own set of brands, and Amazon has their own set of brands too. Amazon Basics, right? Anyway. And then you have generic products like this, which you will be hard pressed to find, but sometimes you can find products that have no brand at all. They just are marketed as the base product, and there is not a lot of marketing associated with them because nobody can take ownership of that, the benefits of the marketing. Okay. Good. Now, what else about the product? The augmented products. What else do you use for identifying the product? The packaging, right? The packaging is a functional aspect of the product that keeps the integrity of the product, and it makes it maybe more convenient to either use or reuse the product. So oftentimes you will see some packaging improvements that maybe make the product easier to use, like for example, zip bags added to many product categories so that you can reuse the bag without the product getting as quickly stale, right? Labeling is the part of the package usually, but it could be separate. That gives you information about what's in the product or how the product can be used or some of the features or technical specifications associated with the product. There might be some legal requirements on what needs to be in the label, like for example in the case of food, the FDA will require you to have certain pieces of information like ingredients and maybe some of the caloric content associated with consuming the products. Okay, and then finally, one last aspect of products that I want to touch on, just even if it's briefly, is this idea of product quality, right? Which is essentially determined by the consumer by looking at the difference between how they expect the product to perform and how the product performs. And by performance, I'm talking about broadly here, right? So if you're eating a piece of gum, right, performance will be things like the flavor, how long that flavor actually lasts, and what is the consistency of the product when you put it in your mouth, or maybe when you've been chewing it for 30 minutes, right? So there could be a whole host of considerations that are built in under this idea of product quality, right? And of course, product quality is going to be an important aspect of your product strategy, where you're going to have to determine how much are you going to invest in it to make sure that your products are up to snuff, and because they're going to compare to your competitors, right? Now we've talked a little bit about product. Now let's talk a little bit about price. Now I would probably argue that price is the most powerful of all the marketing tools that you have at your disposal, and the reason why is because A, everybody cares about price, and B, it can be changed easily, right? And it matters in all product categories, right? So price is not just the money that you spend, but anything that you need to give up to buy or use the product. That might be effort as well, right? If your product, for example, is hard to find because it's not available in many places, that is part of the price that the consumer will have to pay to actually find the product, maybe drive to multiple stores, etc. Okay. It is probably the most important marketing tool because it directly relates to revenue, right? Whereas all the other marketing expenses that you're going to engage in, like advertising, product design, everything else, it's indirectly affecting your revenue, right? And remember, revenue revenue, your revenue, that's an R, although it doesn't look like it. It's going to be the quantity you sell times your price per unit. Right? So as you can see in this simple linear equation, your price is directly related to your revenue. Okay? So if you increase price, you might be tempted to think that your revenue is going to increase, right? What I'm not showing here, and I'm assuming everybody knows, I hope you've taken Econ 101, and if you haven't done so yet, I would strongly suggest you do, okay? The quantity of units that you're going to sell are going to be also a function of price. So price directly affects your revenue, but it also does so indirectly, right? So you need to be very mindful of how you set your prices, okay? It's very flexible because it can be easily changed, unlike product design, for example, which might take a year or two until you can actually make use of it. Prices, you can change them right away, right? And on the other hand, it's also dangerous because if you choose the wrong price, it will have huge repercussions in your sales, okay? Now, you can use price for different things, right, in terms of objectives for the firm. And I'm going to start from the bottom here. The basic objective will be to have the survival of the firm. So oftentimes you might have to lower your prices just so that you can sell more units, okay? And this tactic, just to make sure that you can pay the bills, is used by a lot of manufacturers or service providers. Like, for example, you might be able to find some extra good deals nowadays because people are not buying certain things, right? So to ensure survival, companies will lower their prices. Like, for example, I was coming to the office today and I got a message in the radio, right? I was listening to the radio, and one of the companies, local companies, I think it was roofing company, right? They were saying because it's the winter time and nobody wants to replace their roof, we have a sales or a special where you can just, pay us for the cost of the materials and, we'll install it for free. The idea being, we might as well, get a little bit of revenue because otherwise we might go out of business. We're not trying to make necessarily profit here. We're just trying to survive, right? Status quo is the idea of maintaining the situation the way it is, right? So the idea with pricing and status quo will be, if you're not trying to ruffle any feathers or make anybody upset, and by anybody I mean your competitors, one thing that you can do is you can maintain your price at the current level, right? So by maintaining prices or fixing prices, and what you're going to do is you're going to maintain whatever was happening in status quo. And this also works with consumers, right? When companies don't change your price, and you know exactly what to expect, right? Another objective that you might have is to gain market share. Now, market share, in my opinion, but this is an opinion, okay? It's a misleading metric because most of the times when you're trying to gain market share, you do that at the cost of profits, right? So there is a very easy way of gaining market share. If you drop your price, people are going to buy your product. In fact, if you want to give it away, a lot of people will get your product. But obviously, financially, that's not a smart decision, right? So remember, market share, by the way, is the sales of your product, right, divided by the total sales of all products in the product category, right? Total sales, okay, that's your market share. So because of this, you can always, market share, you can always give up profits to obtain market share. I'm not a big fan of market share, but you need to know what it is, right? Is your sales divided by the total sales in the industry, okay? And by sales, it could be the units or revenue, it doesn't matter. Meaning you can compute both. It does matter in the sense that they do mean slightly different things. Okay, be aware that you know which metric you're using. And then finally, you have profits, which, if you ask me, is the most financially competent metric to use. So basically profitability, right? Try to achieve as much of a profit as you can, because as a firm, what you're trying to do is stay in business, right? And if you're not making money, it's going to be hard to stay in business. And you can show that different prices are going to impact your revenue, and because of that, your profits, right? So you're going to try to set the prices as high as you can so that you can make as much money as possible. But also notice if you charge a price that is too high, the quantity that you're going to be able to sell is going to come down. So there is an optimal price that is going to be somewhere between a really cheap price where you're making no money and a really high price where nobody's going to buy your product. And you can just devote quite a bit of time of trying to find what is this price maximizing number, basically price, right? Profit maximizing price. If you take econ, you will do some theoretical work with this. In real life, the way you find a price that maximizes profits is by doing small experiments with price and see what works and what doesn't. By the way, this is easily enabled nowadays in online shopping, where you can have different prices for different people buying the product, and you can see how they react to it. In a traditional environment, it's harder to do this because you cannot change the price as quickly in a store as you can online. Now, when it comes down to pricing, strategy is very generic. There are only two strategies, right? You can either price high or price low. And there are different words for expressing this, but a couple that you need to know because they are used all the time. One is price skimming. The idea of skimming is charging a high price so then you can get the best of the market. This actually comes from farming, when you get milk from a cow, and you have a bucket where you're, let's say, getting the milk. What will happen at the top is all the fat, all the cream of the milk that you're getting will float because, as you probably know, I hope, fat is less dense than water, so it sits on top, right? So skimming the milk is removing that fat that is at the top, and that's where this term comes from, is by getting the best of the market, the cream of the market, right? By charging a high price and having only customers that are willing to pay quite a bit for the product. Penetration pricing is the opposite. That's when you charge a low price so that you can get as much of the market as possible, right? So that you can expand the market rapidly. But remember, at the end of the day, this is charging a high price and this is charging a low price, right? That's it. Now, the specifics of how high and how low, that can be tricky, right? But strategically, it's simple. Okay, and finally, to finish this part one and to finish our discussion on price, there are a couple of aspects of price that are important for us to acknowledge other than just high or low, right? One is psychological pricing. A lot of the decisions that we make, we are influenced by the number and the price tag, right? And one simple example of that is this idea of even or odd pricing, right? Odd pricing is when a manufacturer or a company or retailer uses a price that is giving you the impression of being lower than it is. For example, $9.99. Why? Why do manufacturers use these 99s? Why? Because this looks psychologically lower than 10. 10 has two numbers, right? Past the decimal point, right? Here. That way they have all the same number of numbers, right? But you can see, right? And it looks deceivingly, I will say, lower than this. So it's less than $10, right? Even though we all know it's $10, right? But when you see it, oftentimes it seems to give you the impression that it's a little bit cheaper. So you'll find a lot of odd pricing, right? Even pricing is the opposite. It's to charge a quantity that it's a whole quantity, and because of that, people might be willing to just dispense with the amount. For example, $1, right? You'll find this like $1 items used to be popular eons ago. I don't know if they're still around. I don't go to much. I don't go to a lot of fast food, but I remember when Wendy's it was, yeah, in the early 2000s introduced the $1 items in their menu, right? That's an example of even pricing, right? Because it's just $1, right? You take it out of the bill, and that's it. You're done. Although maybe with the taxes it's more than one, but maybe you get the point. Okay. The opposite to that is symbolic pricing. Not the opposite. A different concept is this idea of symbolic pricing or prestige pricing, which is the idea that as you charge a higher price, people associate a higher quality or more luxurious or higher status item just because the price is high. And you can see this in some product categories. For example, when Tag Heuer, Tag Heuer, I don't know how to pronounce that name, it's a Swiss manufacturer of watches, or maybe I should say timepieces, right, entered the US market. In the 80s, they didn't do very well. And the reason why they didn't do very well is the prices were too low. They didn't change the product line much. They increased their prices, and voila, people started associating their products with higher quality, and because of that, started selling more products. Now they're struggling because of other reasons, but prestige pricing can actually work in some product categories, especially where product quality is hard to ascertain. If it's easy to see, this may not work as well. Okay. Reference pricing is the idea of using somebody else's price as a reference point, so that people can think that your price is more competitive or more reasonable. An extreme case of this, it's the way, for example, Bugatti sells their cars, right? Bugatti is a very expensive car. Their Chiron car, I think it's about $3 million right now. I'm not exactly sure about the price because I think it's marked in euros and this, fluctuation of the currency. So let's just say about 3 million, which is a lot of money for a car, right? And that looks extremely expensive until you start selling the car at airplane shows, which is what they do, right? Because when you're buying a Gulfstream for 100 million, those $3 million cars would look downright cheap, right? So, and you're using reference pricing so that people can just realize how good of a value your product is at just a cool 3 million. And by the way, this is used in many other cases. It doesn't have to be that extreme, right? And then finally, prices are discounted. Multiple ways to do this. One is seasonal discounting, where, for example, certain clothing items will vary by season, right? And so in the spring, you might have discounted winter clothing because it's going to be a whole year where you're not going to be able to use those products, right? That's seasonal. By the way, seasonal discounting doesn't have to go for a year, right? And this seasonal discount is, for example, what bars offer you almost every day if they have a let's say a special where if you come before a certain time you get a cheaper price, right? So maybe drinks might be cheaper if it's before 5 p.m., right? That's seasonal discounting, right? Because it changes with time. Seasonal, it just means it is. Quantity discount is the more you buy, the cheaper the item is. And then promotional is we just have an event, right? A special occasion, and because of that, we're going to give you a discount, but there is no necessarily seasonality, so it's not like it's going to come back again. And it's not because you're buying more or less. Okay? Good. And that's all I want to say, at least for right now, in terms of these two